Black Indian because I wanted to tell the story of my family. And writing Black Indian has allowed me to uncover heritage. It's allowed me to uncover lost traditions and culture. But it's also allowed me to tell my mother and my sister's stories. And I want to be clear about, it is a story that talks about being bi-ethnic or biracial or triracial. It's about being mixed blood, and it's about what it meant to be on that migration trail for my family, my ancestors, and how the migration trail functioned as erasure for us as African Americans who married American Indians, who were the grandchildren of mulattoes, indentured servant white women and Africans, who married on the master's plantation. So that, there's a lot, right? So I do want to tell that story of migration. I purposefully have traced my ancestors' journey from North Carolina and Virginia into Kentucky and Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and then finally Michigan. Because I think it's important for me to give voice to their journey and how hard it was to have to sell your homeland. In 1831, Nat Turner's rebellion was, for Nat Turner and the people who rebelled, it was a necessity at that time, to have an insurrection. But after that insurrection, the free people of color suffered, and the slaves suffered. And my folks, my ancestors, after that rebellion, they were like, we need to move. And actually, even before that rebellion, I have to say, restrictions were tightening on mixed bloods and free people of color. So writing this book has been a way for me to kind of talk about that. One thing too, while they were on the migration trail and while they were moving from state to state and just suffering atrocities and discrimination and prejudice, these kinds of things, but they lost things. They lost language, they lost culture, they lost ancestors' names, they lost so much. But the thing about being a Black person in America is we are resilient. And so when they lost something, they gained something else. It was losing that farmland or selling that farmland and moving to gain a sense of freedom and to gain a sense of autonomy, as someone who worshiped whatever it was they wanted to worship, or to marry whoever they wanted to marry. And I will say that in Indiana, one of my branches of my family, they're the Roberts family, and they have the Roberts settlement, and my predecessor's papers are actually in the Library of Congress. Elijah Roberts as being this mixed blood person, and the family lore is that an African slave married an American Indian woman, and that's how their lineage started. And then there's another piece of that lineage that says that African slave was actually the son of a master and an African woman. And so if that's the beginning of, the man, the white master who came from Cornwall, who married an African woman, who had a son who he actually couldn't claim as his son, and then that son married an American Indian woman, right there you have three nations, right? So this excites me. That recovering that heritage and that lost tradition and that culture really, really excites me. And at the same time, there's a sense of sadness sometimes when I see how some of my ancestors have been just left off of the rolls, or just kind of erased from reservation. I shouldn't say it like that, but they have been. If they left the reservation, then they were taken off the rolls. if they escaped the reservation or if they left their tribe, you couldn't claim. You couldn't claim your tribal history and your tribal heritage. So Black Indian is definitely about that. It's about recovering that lost history, ancestry, heritage. But my memoir is also about telling my mother's story and telling my aunt's story as these beautiful, young, mixed blood girls growing up in the Midwest. These, beautiful and just hot, like they knew it. The story was that their grandfather had to have a gun for each one of them because they were so beautiful. But they were also kind of the property of their father, and they became the property of their husbands, and they had no voice for themselves. Like they had no, it's almost as if they had no real identity out of being a daughter, and then being a wife, and then being a mother. And for me, as a writer, that's so hard. As someone who has tried to express themselves with language and to write about what it means to be a woman, I couldn't imagine only being those things and not being myself, or not having a moment to figure out what it was I wanted to do in this life. But I will say I was a young mom. I had my daughter at 21. I was far too young to have a daughter, I think. And my daughter kind of became my sister. Like, I raised her, and she raised me. We raised each other, I'll say that. But I think that because I had a daughter, and because I knew that there were secrets in my family, and I truly believe that secrets disrupt identity. I think secrets in your family become the thing that forms your identity. And maybe I'm just a precocious child who didn't get talked to enough or didn't get hugged enough. But I honestly believe I'm also a writer who set out to tell the stories that I needed to hear as a young mixed blood girl who people always said, "Oh, you have that good Indian hair," and "Ooh, girl, why did you lock your hair?" And my family would always say that to me, and I'm like, well, this is my journey. I know what your journey looked like. And I set out to write about their journey. I set out to write about what it was like for them in their lives. So that's one of the reasons that I wrote Black Indian. Yes, definitely to talk about what it means to be Black Indian in this country. And right now, I actually, so I'm a women's traditional dancer. I've been dancing powwow circuits for maybe the last 10, 11 years, probably more. Maybe 10, 11 years. I guess I'll say it like that. And then I've sang on 5 or 6 American Indian drums. In researching my book, I felt like I was giving myself permission to come back to the culture. Even though I knew I was raised African American, but I also knew my mom's oral history was, you are white, you are Indian, and you are a little bit of black. And I would always say, "Mama, what do you mean I'm white? Like, look at these naps, look at this hair." And, this kitchen, as we call it in the African American community. But so that's like the oral history that I grew up with. And, but she could never tell me who those tribal members were, like who those American Indians were. And I wanted to know, so I just started researching. And I really started researching in earnest when I went to Salt Lake City in Utah. And I already had my grandma manuals, like her name, her birth date, all that good stuff. And so I found her social security number. And if I could find her social security number, then I could find like her parents. And I put all that information into Ancestry.com. And I don't want this to be an Ancestry.com, video or ad. But like when I put that information in, her people came up, her husband came up, all the manuals came up, and I traced those manuals back to Sampson County, North Carolina, to the Kahari Reservation in North Carolina. And I went to that powwow, gosh, maybe 7 years ago, somewhere around there. And I picked up their souvenir book. Flipping through the book, I saw a manual who looked exactly like my grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, in one of my pictures. And I was like, what happened? Like, how come we don't know them? How come we don't know this tribe? How do we lose this? And I know that writing Black Indian is really, really about recovery. It's really about reclamation. It's about reclaiming that history and that heritage that's lost. And that I think that I couldn't actually do as an African American because of slavery, right? Slavery is this whole different kind of rupture. Coming over on not the Mayflower, but coming over on a different kind of ship. And then having all those Africans, mixed together in one ship, and then all of them having to learn one language after being these Wolof and these, Togolese, and, and those are names that Europeans gave those countries, and Africans are now calling themselves. But I couldn't reclaim the Africans like that. I didn't know that history, that heritage, and that culture. And I'm trying. I am trying. That could be another book. That could be another memoir on my father's side, which is where I know that 40% of that sub-Saharan, actually over 50% of sub-Saharan West African comes from, and 30% of my DNA is West African. And one of my friends said it's probably Yoruba. And I'm like, it could be anything. It could be Fulani. I could be Fulani. So, but I'm happy that I did my DNA test. I will say that. At the same time, I kind of already knew a lot of what my DNA test said, except I did not know that I have a 100% Ashkenazi Jewish ancestor. Who is that? They didn't come to any family reunions. I'm like, who is this Jewish person in my family? Am I a Jewish princess? I don't know who they are. I don't identify with Jewish people because we never had any Jewish celebrations. It was all about being, it was about being the label that we were given. Black person in America, African American person in America. And I am a proud Black woman. I have to say that. I don't want anybody out there thinking that I'm better than or that I'm trying to claim. And, do your DNA and you'll see. Do your own DNA. Write your own story. But for me, I wanted to know. And I wanted to empower myself with that information, that history, that heritage part. But I also wanted to empower myself by uncovering those secrets in my family. And I'm hoping that my book is a way for other women to share and to start talking about and to start naming names in terms of the people who did them wrong, or who took away their voice, or who touched a young girl when they shouldn't have touched a young girl like that. So I'm hoping that my book does become something that empowers women and children and girls and mixed bloods and, Black Indians and, people who have not been counted in the tapestry of America. Yes, so that's what I'm hoping that Black Indian does. And that's why I wrote the book.